Arizona Territory, 1879. A time when law was not a promise. It was a shadow cast by the barrel of a gun. Towns were built from dust, and kept alive with blood. People killed, people died, and the desert kept its silence. But in one town, the sheriff was different. Marshal Owen Blackwood. They said he knew about murders before they happened. Not guessed, knew. As if someone had placed the scene in his mind ahead of time. The crack of the gun, the slump of the body, the exact words a victim would whisper before the last breath left them. And always, the smallest, strangest details that had not even existed yet. Some called him a prophet. Others, the devil's pawn. But all agreed on one thing. When Owen spoke a name, that name did not stay alive for long. This is not just a tale of a sheriff. This is about the ledger he carried, a thick, leather-bound book that wrote death before life had time to live it. Some say the book recorded the truth. Others believe it created it. Tonight, I will open those pages for you. I will show you the murders before they bled, the names before they screamed. Welcome to the Withered Ledger, where some names are written in ink, and others, in time. The man who stood at the scene too early. The sun had not yet burned the morning fog from the dirt streets of Grayswick when the first whispers of Marshal Owen Blackwood began. It always started that way, not with a gunshot, not with a scream, but with a hushed sentence carried across the town like wind through the saloon shutters. The Arizona Territory in 1879 was a place of open graves and quick tempers. The law was not a constant presence. It was a fragile thing, depending entirely on the man who wore the badge. In Grayswick, that man was Owen Blackwood, tall, narrow-shouldered, with a face carved from years of desert wind and sleepless nights. His coat was black, the same one in every story, the same one people swore they had seen long before meeting him. No one knew where he had come from. Some said he was once a Pinkerton who had gone too far in a case. Others believed he had been a preacher, until he learned his sermons could not save a town already sold to the devil. But one thing everyone agreed on: Owen Blackwood did not arrive after trouble started. He was already there, like trouble was following him, or he was following it. It was the 11th of June when the story that would haunt Grayswick truly began. That morning, the Red Ace Saloon was waking up in its usual way, the smell of stale whiskey from the night before mixing with the sharp bite of tobacco smoke. Bartender Silas Greer was polishing the same glass he had been holding for 15 minutes, watching through the swinging doors as a dust devil spun itself down the main street. Then the doors swung open. Not with urgency, not with panic. Just that slow, deliberate push. Owen Blackwood stepped inside. He did not remove his hat. He did not look around to see who was there. He simply walked to the middle of the room, placed his gloved hands on the edge of the bar, and said quietly, "You might want to step aside, Silas." "Why's that?" Silas asked, frowning. "Because in about 30 seconds, that wall behind you is going to have a bullet hole in it. And you do not want to be standing between the man holding the gun and the man who is about to fall." The saloon went silent. No music from the piano, no clink of glasses. Just the creak of the floorboards as a few patrons shifted uneasily. Silas let out a short laugh. "Owen, you've been sniffing too much desert wind again." The front doors slammed open so hard they nearly came off their hinges. A man staggered in, coat torn, eyes wild. His hand went to his belt, and before anyone could say a word, a revolver flashed in the dim light. The shot cracked like lightning. Glass exploded from a bottle on the back shelf. Silas stumbled, dropping the glass he had been polishing. Behind him, the wall now bore a neat, clean bullet hole. And before the man with the gun could fire again, Owen was already moving. No hesitation. No draw from the hip. His revolver was out and smoking before anyone saw him pull it. The gunman collapsed, his weapon skidding across the floorboards, his body landing in exactly the spot Owen had pointed to moments before. The saloon erupted in chaos, voices overlapping, chairs scraping, boots thudding against the floor. Silas stared at Owen like he was looking at something unnatural. "How the hell did you?" Owen simply holstered his gun, tipped his hat, and walked toward the swinging doors. On his way out, he said without looking back, "Tell the undertaker his next job's waiting on the floor. And tell him I said the man's name was Reuben Ellis. He'll find it in the inside pocket of the coat." The undertaker, Mr. Dalrymple, later confirmed the name was exactly where Owen said it would be, a folded letter addressed to R. Ellis. But no one in town had ever seen this man before. No one except, perhaps, Owen. By nightfall, the story was all over Grayswick. People were no longer whispering that Owen might know things before they happened. They were saying it outright, that he could see them. That he had some second sight, some unnatural instinct that let him stand in a place before death arrived there. 3 days later, it happened again. This time at the freight yard, just before the afternoon train rolled in. 2 men were arguing over a shipment, one claiming the other had stolen from his crates. Several witnesses said the fight was loud, ugly, and dangerous, but it had not yet turned violent. Until Owen walked up. "You'll want to take 3 steps back," he told one of the men. "Otherwise you'll be standing right where he's going to land when the train whistle blows." The men blinked at him in confusion. Then, right on cue, the train's whistle shrieked through the air. One of them lunged forward, shoving the other. His boot caught on the track's edge, and he fell backward, exactly into the spot Owen had pointed at. His head hit the corner of the platform. By the time the whistle's echo faded, he was gone. It was after that second incident that people began watching Owen differently. It was not just that he could predict violence. It was the way he did it, calm, unshaken, like he had already been there before. Some of the older folks swore his eyes looked different in those moments. Not brighter. Not wilder. Just older. As if, for a few seconds, they carried the weight of something far beyond the present. Owen never explained. He never defended himself against the gossip. But the gossip grew teeth. Some said he had made a deal with something in the desert. Others claimed he carried a book, a leather-bound ledger, where all the names and scenes were written down before they came to pass. No one had seen this book. Not yet. That night, long after the freight yard incident, Owen was seen walking alone down the empty main street. The lamplight caught the edge of his black coat as he turned toward the jailhouse. Inside, he sat at his desk, a single lamp burning low. He reached into his coat and pulled out something thick, wrapped in oilskin. He unwrapped it slowly. A book. Dark leather. Its corners worn, its spine cracked. He opened it to a page near the middle. The handwriting was precise, deliberate, each line an execution order from a future that had not yet happened. His finger stopped halfway down the page, tracing the next name written there. He read it silently. Then, without a change in his expression, he dipped his pen into the ink and wrote the exact time the death would occur. When he leaned back, his eyes flicked up to the wall. There, nailed in place above the desk, hung a small, worn calendar. The date he had just written was tomorrow. And somewhere out in the desert night, far beyond the glow of the town's last street lamp, a coyote howled. It was not answering the moon. It was answering him. The ribbon that never belonged. The Callaway homestead sat on the edge of the desert, where the last tufts of grass surrendered to sand and stone. It was the kind of place where wind made its own language, rattling loose boards, whispering through the dry stalks of corn left standing from last season. On the morning of July 4th, the Callaways discovered that their youngest daughter, Mary, was missing. She was 15, too old to wander off like a child, too young to survive alone in a land that could kill a man in a day. The family searched the property first, then the fields, then the thin trail leading toward town. They found no footprints, no dropped belongings, nothing but the faint impression of something heavy having been dragged through the dust, ending abruptly in the hardpan. By afternoon, the search had spread. Men from town rode out on horseback, calling her name, their voices snatched away by the dry wind. Women gathered near the Callaway porch, trying to comfort Mary's mother, who kept insisting she had heard her daughter's voice just after dawn, distant, strained, and then cut off. It was almost sundown when Marshal Owen Blackwood appeared. He did not join the searchers in the fields. He did not ask the family for clues. He simply rode past the Callaway house without slowing. his black coat flaring slightly as the wind caught it. His horse carried him down a narrow track that led away from town, toward the abandoned mining shacks in the foothills. By the time the other men realized he was gone, he had already reached the last of the shacks. Owen dismounted and stood before the splintered door. The place had been empty for years. The miners had left when the vein ran dry, leaving behind only rusted tools and walls so thin the wind passed straight through them. But Owen walked inside like a man who knew exactly what he would find. Later, those who followed him there would never forget what they saw. Mary Calloway lay on the floor, her face turned toward the single broken window. Her eyes were open, clouded now, fixed on a sky she would never see again. Her hands were folded neatly on her chest, as if someone had taken care to arrange her. And tied around her hair was a ribbon, deep purple, silk, untouched by dust. Mary's mother swore her daughter had never owned such a ribbon. The Calloways were not poor, but silk was a luxury out here. Purple silk was rarer still. And yet Owen had told the men, before they even reached the shack, that she would be found, with her hair tied back in a ribbon the color of a bruise. He had said it in that same flat tone he always used, not prophetic, not dramatic. Just certain. The discovery changed the tone in town. Before, people had marveled at Owen's strange ability, sometimes even relied on it. But now, a girl was dead. And he had known exactly where she was, exactly how she would look. It was not a talent anymore. It was suspicion. At the Red Ace Saloon that night, the talk was louder, sharper. "You tell me," one man muttered over his drink, "how a man can describe a murder scene before he's even been there, unless he put it there himself." Another nodded. "And that ribbon? That's not the kind of detail you guess at. That's something you remember because you tied it yourself." There were others, quieter voices, who argued that maybe Owen really could see the future. But even they spoke with unease. Seeing the future was one thing. Seeing it and not stopping it, that was another. The next morning, Owen was back in his office. He sat behind the desk, the blinds half closed against the rising sun. On the desk, in plain sight, lay the same leather-bound ledger. Its cover caught the light in places where the leather had worn smooth. He opened it. On the left-hand page, in his neat handwriting, was the entry. Mary Calloway, shack in the hills, purple ribbon, eyes toward the window, 7:14 p.m. Beneath that, one final detail, discovered by me. He closed the ledger and set it aside as if it were nothing more than a sheriff's logbook. But the way his hand lingered on the cover, the way his eyes stayed fixed on it for just a beat too long, told another story. He did not write these things down after they happened. The ink was too fresh, the time too precise. And then, the voice of another storyteller breaks in. The year is 1901. The frontier has changed. The railroad runs deeper into the territory. Telegraph poles cut the horizon into measured distances. And somewhere in a cramped boarding room above a printing shop, a man sits at a desk with that same ledger open before him. He is not a lawman. He is a historian, a collector of strange tales from the dying days of the Old West. His name does not matter here, though later some would call him cursed. He speaks to us in the quiet tone of a man who has already seen too much. "I came across the name Owen Blackwood while researching unsolved murders in the Arizona Territory," he says. "At first I thought him a myth. A ghost lawman, appearing where violence was about to strike. But the stories lined up too neatly. They all pointed back to him. And then I found the ledger." He turns a page. The leather creaks. The scent of dust and something metallic, ink, or maybe blood, rises faintly from the paper. It was in a trunk, in the back room of a trading post set to be torn down. The owner claimed it had been there for decades. I knew it before I opened it. You can feel the wrongness in certain objects. I read the first page. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. Names, dates, times, and details. I flipped ahead and found the entry for Mary Calloway. Everything was there. The shack. The ribbon. The position of her hands. The exact time of discovery. He pauses. But here is what unsettled me. The ink, it had not faded. Not one stroke. As if it had been written yesterday. I ran my thumb along the edge of the page and found the surface smooth, no impression, no sign it had been pressed by a pen 20 years ago. I do not believe it was written when they said it was. I believe it writes itself. Back in 1879, the ribbon remained the town's obsession for weeks. Some claimed it was a mark, that whoever tied it was leaving a signature, daring others to connect the crimes. Others said the ribbon had not been there until Owen saw her, that he had brought it with him. No one asked Owen directly. The few who might have tried found themselves silenced by the weight of his stare. But the ledger, in 1901, told more than the townsfolk had known. The historian flips another page, eyes narrowing. There are entries in here with dates that have not yet come to pass. I should close it. Burn it. But I cannot. You do not walk away from something like this. It follows you, in your mind if not in your steps. And now, the ledger is here, in my possession. I tell myself it is for research. That is a lie. The truth is, I want to know. I need to know if what it writes comes to pass. He closes the book. The sound is soft, but final. Outside, the wind rattles the loose shutters of the boarding room, the same way it rattled the shack in the hills where Mary Calloway was found. And somewhere, deep in the pages, ink that had been invisible a moment ago begins to appear. It curves into letters, letters into a name. The historian does not yet see it. Not yet. The ledger that writes ahead. The book was heavier than it looked. Thick, leather-bound, the cover worn smooth in places where hands had gripped it too tightly for too long. The corners were scuffed, the edges cracked, and the faint smell that rose from it was neither paper nor ink, but something older, harder to name. I kept it on my desk for 3 nights before I dared open it again. Inside, the pages were cream-colored, unlined, filled with small, precise handwriting. Each entry was a name, a location, the exact time of death, and almost always, the last words spoken by the victim. Some of the dates were decades old. Others were still to come. That was the part one could not stop thinking about. If the ledger was true, and after Mary Calloway, I could no longer doubt it, then somewhere, at this very moment, people were alive only because their appointed hour had not yet arrived on these pages. And when that hour came, nothing could stop it. 1879, Arizona Territory. It was a week after the Calloway girls' burial when a man named Elias Booth staggered into the Red Ace Saloon. He was a drifter, the kind of man who'd traded away his youth for whiskey and cards, wearing a hat that looked older than he was and boots with more holes than leather. He leaned against the bar, voice low but urgent. "I seen it," he told anyone who'd listen. "Day before it happened, I seen Owen Blackwood standin' over a body that wasn't even cold yet." No one believed him at first. Elias was known for seeing things that weren't there, gold in dry creek beds, friendly women in unfriendly towns. But he swore to it. Said he was headed to the hills looking for a lost burro when he spotted Owen kneeling beside a man in the dust. "The fella had a bullet right here." Elias tapped his temple. "Dead as the desert." Owen looked up at me like he'd been caught, then just walked away. Next day, sheriff rides into town and says a man's been murdered up by the ridge. Same man I saw. Same place. Only thing is... Elias took a deep pull from his drink. "He wasn't dead when I saw him. Not yet." The story spread quick, like dust on the wind. People avoided Owen's gaze after that, as if eye contact alone might mark them for an early grave. 1901, narrator. I ran my fingers slowly down the most recent pages. The handwriting did not change, steady, deliberate, as if the same hand had written every word, no matter the year. I knew that was impossible. Owen Blackwood would be an old man now, if he were even alive. And yet the ink seemed fresh. The last 3 entries were dated only days ago. One name I recognized, a laborer found dead behind the freight yard. Another belonged to a man I'd read about in the morning paper, stabbed outside a boarding house just 2 nights past. But the third name froze me. It belonged to Charles Avery. Charlie. my friend. The man who had brought me soup when I was sick last winter, who had helped me carry my things when I moved rooms. The man who lived 3 doors down in this very boarding house. The ledger listed him plainly. Charles Avery, alley behind Pike Street, 11:47 p.m. Tell her I never blamed her. The date was tomorrow. I closed the book, but the words stayed burned into my mind. I tried to think logically. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was a cruel trick left behind by someone who had known Charlie before me. But logic had no place here. I had read the other entries. I had seen how precise they were, down to the minute, down to the last word. And if this book could see ahead, then Charlie was already a dead man. 1879, Owen Blackwood. The ledger lay open on Owen's desk. A thin pencil rested across the crease, marking a half-finished entry. Outside, the wind rattled the sign over the sheriff's office, and the distant sound of a hammer striking iron echoed from the blacksmith's. Elias Booth's story had reached him. He could feel the weight of the townsfolk's suspicion like grit in his teeth. But Owen didn't care about their gossip. He cared about the book. It had been with him for years, longer than he cared to remember. It had appeared in his saddlebag one night after a dream he could not fully recall, a dream of a faceless figure handing it to him in an empty street, the world around them silent as a churchyard at midnight. He had opened it the next morning and found the first entry already written. It had come true that afternoon. From then on, he had stopped questioning. He simply read, and when the time came, he was there. Was he there to save them? No. The ledger had never lied, and Owen had learned early that it could not be altered. Every attempt ended the same way. A fall postponed by an hour still happened an hour later. A man pulled from a fire still died of the smoke days afterward. The ledger did not record possibilities. It recorded certainties. 1901 narrator. I told myself I wouldn't interfere. That I would treat the ledger as a historical artifact, nothing more. But that was before I saw Charlie's name. I waited until nightfall and then walked the streets, the ledger in my coat. My eyes scanned every alley, every shadow, as if knowing the place ahead of time might somehow let me change the outcome. Charlie was at the saloon, playing cards. I watched him laugh, sip his drink, slap a friend on the shoulder. He looked alive in the way only someone unaware of death can look. When I tried to tell him, he just grinned. What's this, some kind of ghost story? You're spending too much time with your old books. But as the clock ticked toward 11:30, I couldn't leave him. 1879, Owen Blackwood. That night, Owen walked into the desert with the ledger under his arm. He stopped at a place where the moonlight cut across the sand like silver blades. He turned the pages, scanning future dates, names he didn't yet know, places he hadn't been. He found one that made his jaw tighten. Elias Booth. Tomorrow. He closed the book. Somewhere inside him, a thought stirred, one he had tried to bury for years. What if I just didn't go? What if the ledger writes what it writes because I am there to see it? The desert wind gave no answer. 1901 narrator. 11:40 p.m. Charlie finally left the saloon, weaving slightly from drink. I followed him, hard hammering, the ledger heavy under my coat. We turned down Pike Street. 11:44. The alley was ahead now, dark and narrow. 11:46. A figure stepped from the shadows. I couldn't see the face, only the glint of steel in hand. Charlie! I shouted, running forward. But it was too late. The knife went in quick, low, under the ribs. Charlie gasped, his eyes wide, and as I caught him, he whispered exactly what the ledger had promised. Tell her I never blamed her. His blood was warm on my hands. I looked past him, but the alley was empty. The figure was gone. Back in my room, I opened the ledger. The entry for Charlie was complete now, no different from when I had first read it. Except for one thing. Beneath his name, in smaller letters, another had appeared. Witness Thomas Hale. My name. The murder that refused to happen. 1879, Arizona Territory. The saloon went quiet the moment Owen Blackwood spoke. He was standing at the far end of the bar, his hat pulled low, eyes fixed on no one in particular. "Judge Harlan dies tomorrow." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. The tone was flat, certain, the same voice Owen used when he told the undertaker to have a coffin ready. Someone laughed nervously. "What, you seen him cough too hard?" Owen didn't answer. He only took a slow sip from his glass, then set it down and left. By nightfall, the whole town had heard. Judge Harlan wasn't exactly beloved. He'd sent more men to the gallows than to prison, and rumor had it he'd taken a bribe or two from the railroad. But murder was still murder, and the weight of Owen's words was too heavy to ignore. The next morning, the courthouse was surrounded. 2 deputies stood at the front door, rifles ready. Harlan's own hired men patrolled the street. Even the blacksmith stood watch with an iron rod in hand. The judge spent the day inside, pacing behind locked shutters. Every sound outside made him flinch. By sundown, he was still alive. When midnight came and went without incident, the whole town exhaled. Maybe, they thought, the ledger had been wrong. Maybe Owen's strange streak had finally snapped. But at dawn, a scream came from Harlan's house. Owen was one of the first through the door. The judge was in his study, pale but alive, sitting behind his desk with a glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. But on the floor near the hearth lay a woman's body. Her throat was cut clean. Her clothes were fine, not a working girl, but someone who'd known wealth. No one in the room recognized her. Owen's eyes went to the ledger. It wasn't with him, but he didn't need it to know she wasn't supposed to be here. This death hadn't been written. The coroner found nothing to identify her, no papers, no jewelry except a simple silver ring. No one came forward to claim her. For days, Owen couldn't stop thinking about it. He'd never seen a death outside the ledger. If the book was truth carved into time, then this woman's murder was something else entirely, something the ledger couldn't see. And that made her the most dangerous thing he had ever encountered. 1901 narrator. The entry was waiting for me when I opened the ledger that evening. I had avoided it since Charlie's death. It sat on my desk like a coiled snake, daring me to come close. But curiosity is its own poison. I turned the pages, my eyes catching on familiar names, men and women whose deaths I'd read about in the paper just days ago. Then, halfway down the next page, I froze. Thomas Hale, boarding house room 3 to 12:03 a.m. I should never have opened it. 3 days from now. I stared until the letters blurred. This was different from reading about Charlie, or the others. Those names were terrible, but distant, part of a story I was telling. This was me. I tried to be rational. If the ledger could not be altered, then the moment was fixed. Fighting it would only push me toward it. But the thought of sitting here, counting down the hours until midnight on the 3rd day, was worse than the death itself. 1879, Owen Blackwood. The judge's uninvited corpse had set the town buzzing. Some said it was proof Owen was no prophet. If he hadn't seen this, maybe he hadn't truly seen anything. Others whispered the opposite. If the ledger missed her, maybe she was never meant to exist at all, and her presence here meant something worse was coming. Owen sat in his office, the ledger open before him. Every page was the same, orderly, inevitable. But this woman was nowhere in it. Her absence gnawed at him. If the ledger's purpose was to record death before it happened, then how could this death have slipped past it? Unless something else was writing the rules now. The idea chilled him more than the desert night. 1901 narrator. I spent the first night after seeing my name trying to outthink the book. Could I simply leave? Go to another city, another country? But the entries listed both place and time. If the ledger had been right about everything else, then my death could happen anywhere, as long as the hour came. I considered destroying it. But if Owen had tried, and I believe he must have, then the book would have resisted. I could almost feel it watching me when my hands lingered too long near the matches. On the second night, I decided to prepare. I cleaned my room, wrote letters, settled my small debts. I told myself it was just prudence. But deep down, I was obeying the same unspoken law everyone in Owen's time had learned: you can't outwalk the page you're written on. 1879, Owen Blackwood. 3 nights after the judge's intruder was buried in a pauper's grave, Owen found something strange. He'd been turning the ledger's pages for the 100th time when he noticed a faint smudge, not quite ink, not quite ash, on the margin beside an entry dated for the following week. When he leaned closer, he saw it wasn't a smudge at all, but a faint, unfinished letter. As if another name was trying to appear but couldn't quite push through. Owen felt an unease he couldn't name. The woman's body. The missing entry. And now, a ghost of a name, struggling to be written. 1901, narrator. The third night came faster than I expected. At 11, I was still pacing my room, the ledger open on the desk, the fatal entry glaring at me. 11:30. My pulse in my ears. 11:50. I sat in the chair, gripping the arms so hard my fingers ached. 11:59. The knock came at midnight. Not loud. Just a soft, deliberate rap on the door. I didn't answer. 12:01. Another knock, the same rhythm. 12:02. The doorknob turned. Slowly. 12:03. The moment the book had promised, the door swung open. And there was nothing. No one. I looked back at the ledger. The entry was gone. In its place, fresh ink gleamed. Unwritten. The dust storm witnesses. 1879, Arizona Territory. It began with a wind. Not the lazy kind that drifted over the desert like a sigh, but a cutting, tearing wind that carried grit sharp enough to slice the skin. It was the sort of storm you could hear coming before you saw it. A low, rising moan that turned into a roar as the desert's bones began to move. Owen Blackwood sat alone in the jailhouse, the lamplight flickering on the thick leather-bound ledger. He had been reading for hours, each entry pulling him further away from the present and deeper into the strange rhythm of the book. The storm hit just after midnight. The jailhouse shuddered. Dust blew in through the cracks, settling over the desk, the floor, even the spine of the ledger. Owen didn't move. Out on the street, a handful of late-night stragglers caught glimpses between the swirling sand, quick, unnatural shadows moving in the jailhouse windows. There were shapes there. Not just Owen's tall, lean figure, but others, 2, 3, maybe more. They stood in ways no prisoner would, no visitor either. Still watching. No one in town recognized those silhouettes. And the storm only grew stronger. Inside, Owen felt the change before he saw it. The air had weight now, a heaviness that pressed against his lungs. The lamplight dimmed, though the flame burned steady. He turned to the barred window, and there they were. Figures. Not quite human, but close enough to unsettle. Their outlines flickered as if they were being lit from behind by a fire that wasn't there. The dust didn't touch them. Their faces, if they had faces, didn't move. And each one was looking not at him, but at the ledger. Owen stood, slowly closing the book. The moment the cover shut, the figures vanished. He opened it again, and the room was full. The air turned cold despite the storm's heat. A whispering sound began to coil around him, syllables in no language he knew. The words weren't meant for him, they were meant for the book. Owen backed away, the ledger still open on the desk. By dawn, the storm had died. When the first townsfolk stepped inside, they found the jailhouse empty. No Owen. No prisoners. Only the ledger sat there, open on the desk. The page was blank, except for 2 words, written in fresh black ink that hadn't been there before. You. 1901, narrator. I had read that part of Owen's story before, in newspaper clippings, in whispered accounts from old men who had been boys back then. But seeing it written in his own ledger was something else entirely. The page was still there. Still blank, except for that single word. You. It wasn't my handwriting, but I felt as though the word was aimed directly at me, as though the paper knew who was holding it. I had avoided touching it for weeks. But ever since the night my name disappeared with the word unwritten, a new thought had been growing in me. If the book could erase, perhaps it could be altered. Perhaps I could save others. Or perhaps I could end them. It was early morning when I decided to try. The air was damp, the city quiet. I set the ledger on my desk, took up my fountain pen, and turned to the page with the most recent future date. It read, Anna Westcott, found in the river, hands bound, 10:14 p.m. Don't let him in. Anna Westcott was alive as far as I knew. I'd seen her at a gathering 2 nights ago. If I could change her fate, maybe I could break the ledger's grip. I set the nib to the page and, hard hammering, crossed out her name. The ink bled more than it should have, spreading in unnatural rivulets across the page. The room grew darker. A sound, faint at first, began behind me. Like water dripping, except faster. I turned. The floor near the door was wet. Water pooled, spreading across the boards. A strong, earthy smell filled the room, the smell of riverbanks and decay. I backed away, the pen still in my hand. The pool widened. And then something floated in it, pale, hair trailing, a woman's face just beneath the surface. Eyes open, staring at me through the rippling water. It was Anna. Her lips moved, slow and heavy, forming words I already knew. Don't let him in. I slammed the ledger shut. The water vanished. The boards were dry. My desk was clean. The air was still. But when I opened the ledger again, Anna's entry had returned, darker now, as though rewritten by an unseen hand, and beneath it was a new name. Thomas Hale, boarding house room 3 to 12:03 a.m. My name. Again. 1879, Owen Blackwood. When Owen came back to town after the dust storm, he didn't tell anyone where he'd been. Some thought he'd taken shelter at the livery, others swore they'd seen him walking in the desert miles away, in the thick of the storm. But the truth was stranger. He had no memory of leaving the jailhouse. One moment he was staring at the word U on the ledger's page, and the next, he was standing outside town at dawn, the book in his hand, the storm gone. The figures had followed him into his dreams for nights afterward. Silent. Watching. Always gathered around the ledger. It was then he began locking it away, keeping it shut unless absolutely necessary. Because he understood now, the book didn't just record death. It had witnesses. And those witnesses were not of this world. 1901 narrator. The temptation to try again was unbearable. I spent the rest of the day staring at my own name in the ledger. Changing Anna's entry had caused reality to react. What would happen if I altered my own? Could I erase myself? Or survive? By evening, the sky outside had turned the color of old brass. A dry wind rattled the shutters. I uncapped my pen. But before I could touch the paper, I noticed something. There were shadows in the room that didn't belong to the furniture. One near the corner. One against the far wall. Another just outside the window, tall, unmoving. I recognized them. From Owen's night in the dust storm. They were here. Watching. I closed the ledger slowly, my pulse in my ears. This time, I didn't hear whispers. I didn't see flickers of flame or dripping water. But I knew, with a certainty that rooted itself deep in my bones, if I changed that page again, the witnesses would not just watch. They would step closer. That night I dreamed of the desert. The wind carried dust and voices. The silhouettes stood in a circle, the ledger open on a stone in the center. And written across both pages in vast, black letters was a single word. You. When I woke, the same word was scrawled across the desk in dust. And the ledger was open. The ledger's new law. 1879, Arizona Territory. Owen Blackwood didn't vanish in the middle of a gunfight, or disappear on a long ride into the desert. It happened in the most unremarkable way possible. One moment, he was sitting in the sheriff's office, head bent over the ledger, and the next, he was gone. No sound. No flash of light. Just absence. His coffee cup still sat on the desk, steam curling up from the surface. His chair rocked once, as though someone had just stood up from it. The ledger lay open in front of that empty chair, the ink on its pages still wet. By the time the deputies arrived, the wind had picked up outside. Dust swirled across the floorboards. No footprints left the building. The door had been locked from the inside. The only thing out of place was the ledger itself. The open page showed no names, no dates, no details. Just a faint shadow of letters that seemed to shift and fade if you looked at them too long. Some in town claimed they'd seen Owen again, standing out in the desert, far from the road, his figure wavering in the heat. But when they approached, he wasn't there. The most whispered version of the story was the one no one wanted to believe, that the ledger had swallowed him whole. 1901 narrator. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was a trick of the light. The ledger was sitting on my desk, its cover shut. I'd been pacing the room, working up the courage to open it. I'd decided that day I was going to test something, a theory that had been growing in my mind since Anna Westcott's name had rewritten itself. I slid my fingers along the edge of the cover. Before I opened it, the page in my mind was blank. Clean paper. But as soon as I looked, as soon as my eyes touched the surface, the words were there. Not fading in, not being written. They were revealing themselves. Like they'd been waiting for me all along. I started experimenting. I'd close the ledger, walk across the room, count to 10, then open it again. Each time, a new entry appeared, but only when I looked. If I opened it without looking, without letting my eyes land on the paper, it stayed blank. The implication was horrifying. The pages weren't empty between murders. They were full, just hidden until they were read. And worse, the moment I read them, they began. The first time it happened, I was sitting by the fire. I opened the ledger to a random page and saw this. Michael Parnell, saloon back room, 11:42 p.m. I told you not to deal him in. At first, I didn't even know who Michael Parnell was. But when I asked at the bar down the street, the keeper told me there was a poker game running that night, and Parnell was indeed playing. I arrived at the saloon just after 11. The front room was loud with laughter and the clink of glasses. Then, from the back, I heard a scuffle. By the time I pushed through the curtain, a man lay sprawled on the floor, a chair overturned beside him, a bullet hole in his chest. The words in the ledger were the same as the last thing I heard him say before he died. I told you not to deal him in. That was when I realized the truth. Reading the ledger was not passive. It was an act. When you looked at a page, you didn't just see the murder, you activated it. The event waited for the reader, like a match waiting for the strike of a flint. The new law of the ledger. The pages are never blank, only hidden. They reveal themselves to the one who opens them. Once read, the murder begins. If the reader's name is on the page, they are already part of the scene. I wish I had stopped there. But curiosity, in my case, was stronger than fear. One rainy afternoon, I opened the ledger again, determined not to flinch. The ink appeared instantly, my name nestled among the words. Thomas Hale, alley behind Weaver's, 9:17 p.m. It's already too late. I froze. It was 6:30. I had not planned to go anywhere near Weaver's store that night. But the entry burned in my mind like a brand. I kept thinking, if I just don't go, I can avoid it. The rain eased just after 8. I stayed home. Poured myself a drink. At 9:10, a knock sounded at the door. When I opened it, a breathless boy stood there, stammering that Mr. Weaver needed my help, something about a package that had arrived for me, by name, and he couldn't carry it. Against all reason, I followed. The alley was dark, wet cobblestones slick underfoot. At 9:17 exactly, a man stepped from the shadows, holding a knife. I don't remember shouting. I don't remember moving. I only remember hearing my own voice say the words I had read hours earlier. It's already too late. The knife never reached me. Another passerby startled the man, and he bolted. I had escaped, but the ledger had been right about everything else. 1879, the last sight of Owen. Months after Owen's disappearance, a prospector named Lyle Barrett stumbled into town claiming he'd seen the Marshal again. Not walking, not riding, but standing in the middle of the desert, his boots not sinking into the sand, his coat unmoving despite the wind. Barrett swore Owen had been holding the ledger. He swore the pages were turning on their own. And he swore that Owen's lips were moving, as if he were reading them aloud to no one. The strange part? Every person Barrett spoke to about this swore they had dreamed of Owen that very night, in the same position, with the same book. It was as if the ledger no longer needed to be in the town to work. As if Owen himself had become its page-turner. 1901, the decision. It is not lost on me that my name will keep appearing. The ledger has decided it. I have 3 choices. Stop opening it entirely. Keep reading and hope to alter outcomes. Or try to write in it myself. But there is a problem. I have tried before. When I put pen to the page, the ink refuses to take unless the ledger wants it. The pen will scratch soundlessly, leaving no mark. But when it does allow it, the air changes. The room changes. And somewhere, someone's path changes forever. Last night I tried again. I wrote a name I hated, someone I thought deserved it. The ink sank into the page instantly. The moment I finished the last letter, a sound like footsteps on dry leaves filled the room. Shadows gathered at the edges of my vision. I closed the book. This morning, I heard the man I had named was dead. Which leaves me with the question that I cannot escape. If the ledger's pages are never blank, and if my reading makes them real, then who is writing them when I am not? And when I am gone, who will read them next? 1879, final rumor. There is one last rumor about Owen Blackwood, whispered only in the farthest reaches of the territory. That he didn't disappear at all. That he is still out there, walking the deserts with the ledger in his hands, finding those curious or desperate enough to open it. And when they do, he is the one who writes their names. 1901, my fear. The book is on my desk now. The cover is closed. The room is silent. But I know that the moment I open it, there will be a fresh page waiting, my page. And when I read it, the scene will already be starting somewhere. Maybe in the next room. Maybe right here. Maybe behind me. The Keeper's Choice. 1901, the storm approaches. The day began with the kind of sky you can taste before you see. A metallic heaviness in the air. The clouds rolling low enough to scrape the roofs. The ledger sat on my desk, its leather cover slick in the damp air, though I had not touched it. It had been 3 days since I'd last opened it. 3 days since I'd seen my own name. The date written beside it was today. I told myself I wouldn't look again. I told myself I could break the chain. But that's the problem with inevitability. It doesn't need your permission. By noon, the wind had picked up. Papers slid across the floor. The lamp flickered without cause. At 12:30, the knock came. 3 hard raps, like a judge's gavel. I froze. The door creaked open on its own. And there he was. Owen Blackwood. 1879, the ledger's ghost. He looked no older than the day he'd vanished. The dust of the territory still clung to his coat, his boots. But his eyes, they were not a lawman's eyes anymore. They were the deep, knowing eyes of someone who had read every death before it happened, and remembered all of them. "Owen," I whispered. He didn't answer. He stepped inside, boots silent on the wood. His gaze went straight to the ledger on my desk. "You've been opening it," he said. His voice was flat, stripped of all human tone. "I had to," I said. "It shows. I know what it shows." The offer. He walked to the desk, touched the cover. "You've read enough to know the rule." "Yes." "And you've read your own name." I nodded. "There's only one way out," he said. My stomach tightened. "Which is?" He looked at me then, and in that moment, I understood the ledger had never been a thing. It had always been a role. You don't escape by avoiding it. You escape by holding it. By keeping it. By writing in it. I shook my head. "You mean becoming you?" "I mean becoming the ledger's next voice. Its next reader. Its next hand. If you write, you do not die. Not until you find someone willing to take it from you. And if I refuse?" He smiled faintly, not with kindness, but with the grim certainty of a hangman pulling the lever. "Then you die tonight." Just as it says. The past returns. Outside, the wind rose to a scream. Dust tore through the streets. A storm like the ones they used to whisper about from '79. The same kind that came the night witnesses saw strangers in Owen's jailhouse. The same kind that came the night before he vanished. I stared at the ledger. "What happens if I take it?" "You'll learn," he said. "What happens to you?" He gave no answer. Just stepped back from the desk, letting the wind push at the windows, letting the silence between us deepen until it became unbearable. The storm battered the glass. My own heartbeat roared in my ears. The choice. I reached for the ledger. My hand hovered over the cover. If I took it, I would live, but I would carry every death it demanded. I would watch them happen. I would write some myself. If I refused, I had only hours. Maybe less. And in that moment, the strangest thought came to me. Perhaps this was how Owen himself had taken it. Perhaps someone else had stood in this same room, ledger before them, storm outside, death in the air, and made the choice I was making now. Perhaps this is how it always went. The first name. I opened the cover. The page was blank. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe I had broken it, that the cycle had failed. Then, slowly, words began to appear, not in ink, but in a dark, bruised shadow that rose out of the paper. A name. A place. A time. Not mine. I realized, with a cold rush of relief and horror, that the ledger now belonged to me. 1879, the last sight of the sheriff. Owen Blackwood stepped to the door. The storm swirled behind him like a living thing. "You'll see me again," he said, "when it's time." Then he was gone. Not walked away. Not vanished into thin air. He simply was no longer there. 1901, the keeper's work. The storm ended as abruptly as it began. I sat at the desk until the sun dipped below the rooftops. I read the page again. The name was of someone I barely knew. But I knew what I had to do. The ledger does not wait. The ledger demands. And so now, as I speak these words, the book is open before me. The name on the next page is one I have not yet read aloud. But I will. Because that is the ledger's law. I could burn it, but the fire would die before it touched the cover. I could bury it, but the ground would spit it back up. I could throw it into the deepest river, but it would be waiting in my room the next night. The ledger does not belong to me. I belong to it. Somewhere, in some year not yet reached, someone else will hear this story. They will think it is just a tale from the Arizona territory. And then, one day, they will find a book thick, leather-bound, its pages waiting. They will open it. And their name will be there. Welcome to the Withered Ledger, where names are written not in ink, not in blood, but in time. And time never runs out.